Hello. Welcome to another episode of Ball Over Passion. I am your boy at George V_AFC, and we are back with another review on Arsenal Leeds, a very fun game, a game that I think uh, a lot of people felt produced some of our greater system goals. You know, it was a game where I feel that we've got a lot of things that we've been working on, but I think had finally tied together in a nice little bow. Some things that we haven't done well all season that we did well. I'm talking about half space crossing, a little bit of the fluidity kind of returned, and I think it was just a generally very enjoyable performance. A lot of stuff that we could break down, and I think that Xavi Garcia and Leeds actually approached us in a really different way than we've been facing with the typical kind of 4-5-1 blocks and doubling up on our wingers. I think there was just a slight difference in how Leeds approached this game, which is probably something interesting to talk about in terms of the press. But first, mate, Curran, how you doing? You good?
Yeah, all good. I mean, I was there, and it was. I tell you what, it was a very nervous first 20 minutes, and then it kind of got going. And then once it got going, the
Mhm.
crowd kind of settled, and then we just kind of went in through the motions, and it was a fairly simple game. But that first 20 minutes, they. It wasn't that they were on top; is they had a couple of chances that Ramsdale had to save, and it was very. I think people were a bit nervous coming back from the international break, given what happened last year and given like the gravity of the situation now that they're what 9 games
Yeah, I
away
mean,
or title, so we're
yeah,
getting to the point where the things. I think people are starting to get a bit nervous, especially in the stadium because we haven't. Let's be real, we haven't been here for a while, especially in the stadium. So I think people are getting a bit nervous and a bit touchy at the stadium. And then once the first goal went in, the penalty went in, I think the game kind of settled down a bit, and we kind of got into our rhythm a bit more and really put our emphasis on the game. So yeah, a very enjoyable game, especially that second half, I feel. But that first 20 minutes, it felt like one of those games where to be champions, you kind of had to ride that out and just sort of get through that game. But we got through it, and then as you mentioned, the fluidity returned, and we really got into some good stuff. But that first 20 minutes, it was kind of looking like a game where it was like, okay, we might be in for a bit of a fight here, and then just get with the win, get away with the win, and see what happens. But
well, I mean, broadly speaking, it was definitely a moment for a slip up. I think
yeah,
that's definitely
100%.
something that we could talk about because, look, we got the news that William Saliba had a much longer term injury, and not to get into the semantics of the medical part of it. It's definitely something that we didn't expect. It's definitely something that was new, and we have to start thinking about a longer term plan in terms of him not being in the 11. And when you kind of combine that, in addition to kind of the post international break that you talk about, this idea that, Arsenal, in terms of responding from European nights, we had struggled previously in the season towards it, not in the sense that we lost results, but, our performance levels definitely felt the
Yeah,
impact whenever we did face somebody midweek. And so this idea that, Arsenal coming back to Leeds, a resurgent Leeds, by the way, a kind of more resolute Leeds with Xavi Garcia, a very different prospect to Jesse Marsch, it definitely set up this trap game, I'll put in quotes, in which a lot of people felt post Man City, Man City just dummied Liverpool 4-1. Everybody was thinking the pressure's on us. It was definitely a time that, we could have faltered, but we didn't. We produced a really dominant display, a display that was quite fluid, as we were saying, and I'm excited to kind of get into it. But first thing that I'll ask you is, there's been a lot of talk about the Rob Holding effect and kind of, again, ignoring some of the medical part of it. When you had a look at this game in terms of Rob Holding, which I think he'd had a fairly okay game,
yeah.
what did you make of kind of the difference we might feel as teams kind of approach a more consistent Rob Holding? Because it was a very interesting approach what Leeds did. And just to set it up, they kind of pressed in a very different way to other teams, where namely their wingers were quite narrow and they stayed quite narrow. So when you're kind of looking at how they decided to attack the problem, we progress with a 3-2-5. Everybody kind of knows this. And we kind of move Zinchenko into the pivot along with Thomas Partey, and we kind of progress in a sense of having Gabriel, what was Saliba, and then Ben White in the back. But now with Rob Holding kind of in the middle, flanked by both Gabriel and Ben White, the impetus on kind of the distribution kind of fell to our more outside center backs in Gabriel and Ben White. And what Leeds did, which was really interesting, I don't know if you picked up on it, was, Somerville and Sinistera themselves, they kind of pressed very narrow, where if the ball went to either Ben White or Gabriel, of course, if it was on, Ben White's side, Somerville would be the one to attack. But, Aronson would just drop in between the pivot with, Thomas Partey, and Sinistera would mark Zinchenko quite closely. And then if that dynamic switched and the ball was on the left-hand side, Sinistero would be the one to engage, and Somerville would be the one to go again narrow and deep. But Aronson constantly was deep onto the pivot. And so it did definitely force, when you talk about that initial first half, we were absolutely kind of adjusting to this very different pressing reality, because they did give our center backs a lot more time on the ball than they usually do. And I
that's
have
the
a
main
feeling.
point. That is the main point, the time they gave on them. Because the thing is, when you build in a 3 and you're really looking to progress, like we were, because you, ironically, our top target would have been perfect here, because he's in a Declan Rice. You have a great wide progressor, someone that will drop and carry and turn and carry. But when you have your progressors wide, you're not comfortable with your middle centre back in that case, would be usually William Saliba, but in this case was Rob Holding. You're really asking the wide centre backs to really, either carry or pass out the press. And I felt personally, and I saw it a little bit different. I felt like they kind of went man to man wide, i.e., they went for Sinistera and
They certainly did, but it was just in a
it
sense
was
that
just
it was where ball side was, right? Like
exactly.
yeah,
So basically, the wingers were basically told to go man to man and really focus in on preventing the
in
the
ball, the
vertical
ball, the
pass,
ball
basically
inside to those like
inside,
half
exactly,
spaces, let's
because
say.
they thought that if they could basically force us to either go back to Ramsdale or go to Holding, it would put pressure on Rob. I think that was the plan. And what they did as well is, whenever Rob had the ball, if we were building in a 2, which there was at times when we would just have Ben be in that right back spot, they would give him time. They would give Rob time. They thought, okay, we'll press Gabriel and maybe force Rob to kind of become a bit overconfident and make a mistake, and he didn't. To be credit to him. So yeah, I mean, we're going to get into this. And there's a reason I put the setup point on the tweet. I want to get into some wacky formation changes. How do we get Holding out the team sort of situations? But the main thing I wanted to point out with the press is, I thought they embraced the problem poorly. I personally did. I think that if you're going to allow for one person to be pressed, it should be Holding. I would have gone for him, because I felt like you can force him into a mistake. If I'm an opposition coach, like, my first thing is funnel the ball to him and prevent the ball into the wide centre backs, because he will, try and run out with it, or he'll try and a big switch and get turnover possession, or you can rob him and go in on goal. That would have been what I would have done. What about you? Did you think that was a good plan from them, or were you a bit surprised they didn't go more for Holding?
I thought, as an opposition coach, I think it was an interesting plan to block. So I think defensively it did its job. The first half wasn't a fluid performance by us. We were definitely struggling to kind of adapt to this. It was definitely a different way of doing it. I do feel that if they had their outlet in terms of Wilfred Nanto, we would have seen this be a very different type of game, where they would have maybe made use of some of the transitions that they did have, as well as Max Wober being out, and of course Tyler Adams. Like, their ability to kind of stretch the pitch big was impacted by the fact that Mark Rocco was doing an insane job in the middle of the park trying to track everybody. And so they definitely kind of weren't able to be as progressive. So in terms of them coming back into a block, it was an excellent tactic, and it frustrated us.
Mm.
In terms of the offensive capability, I think it was a little bit dented, because they didn't tell their forwards to press. And of course, for me, I've talked about this in other group chats when we talk about Liverpool and stuff. I really do feel that they're going to press Rob Holding. And if they don't, they're going to do a very similar idea to PSV, to Leeds, in terms of what other people have done. Let him have the ball, but he can't progress. And so we're going to cut off all of his options. And so therefore that will stifle Arsenal's ability to kind of go through the thirds. And so I think one thing that was really important just to talk about when you talk about going man to man kind of in the back, a really important change that we saw with the Leeds team was, look, everybody knows that they kind of went in this 4-3-3, but what happened a lot was Jack Harrison and Christensen, which was their two midfield kind of players that would flank Roca typically, they dropped to form a back six
Yeah.
along with Luke Ayling, Robert Cockstrike, and Firpo.
Do you
And
know why
so
that was though? And the thing for me is, I feel like they watched our Bournemouth game. I think that they went six, and they thought if they try this six nonsense that they did chasing the game against Bournemouth, we have to go man for man there. They putting us a back six out at times was just. I was seeing it at the game. I was like, why are they dropping so deep? And it
I'll
was
tell you.
especially as a Leeds team, where you think it's a hyper aggressive team under Jesse Marsh. Obviously now with Gracia, they've kind of gone to a bit more defensive route, but the way that they were setting up, it was almost like they were thinking, we are going to set up to not score, to not let them score. That's our main focus. If we can catch them on the break, that's great.
Do you remember our plan for when Liverpool got a man sent off last year with Tommy? And, we
The
basically
3-3-4.
added a little bit more like when we added this back six, and we basically had Ben White and Kieran Tierney operating in the Luke Ayling and Firpo roles. Like it was very, very similar. And like when you ask why did they go to a back six, well, I think the biggest issue is making sure that they covered the fluidity, because with Gabriel Jesus back, there was times that he was popping up on the right, on the left. Trossard was interchanging, and so when we have our front five, right, when Gabriel Jesus drops, because he's not a striker that likes to be a focal point up top, he's not going to stretch that defense in that sense. They were worried about him dropping into the half spaces, and rightly so. But when he does drop, you could basically man mark Xhaka with Christensen, Odegaard with Jack Harrison, Firpo and Ayling would take care of the wingers. And then when Gabriel Jesus would drop, Mark Roca would pick him up. And so everywhere was man-to-man except for the center backs, by the way. And that is the key. They left the center backs free to move in case there was a kind of an emergency case either side. And that was the big reasoning for why they did it. And, when you actually have a look sometimes when we were building, right, we even built in kind of this 4-1-5 where Zinchenko went wide because we were very frustrated with Sinisterra and Somerville at the beginning with those wingers keeping themselves narrow to block the space. And there was times when Zinchenko would go wide and Sinisterra would drop to try to block the entry pass into Granit Xhaka. And we didn't quite see this as much with White, but we were trying to make ways in order to kind of maneuver around and move the Leeds block really quickly. And I think we didn't make use as much of what we did do in the second half, which was a little bit more punchy energy in the tempo, half space crossing, because the space in behind the back six was where we were going to fault them, not the space within the half spaces. So I think there was a lot more focus on getting in behind the Leeds back line, and we kind of showed that with our goals, whether through Ben White, and we'll talk about it, as well as the half space cross with Granit Xhaka. But again, that kind of back six mentality was in order to block any of the entry passes in the half spaces that, Odegaard or Granit Xhaka receiving, or even Jesus when he did drop deep. And, Trossard, we were talking about players that can fill in any dynamic in that front five. But by basically having a back six where your midfielders are in and your wingers operate in the middle third as opposed to your central mid, you kind of leave the center backs free to be able to just purely defend, as opposed to making man marking somebody themselves. And I think that is really the biggest change that I saw. Do I think it worked? Not necessarily, because eventually the amount of running that Somerville and, not really Aronson, but, Sinisterra in particular, those two were doing was always going to tire unless you've got really fit forwards. You needed.
There's a reason why they had to sub Sinisterra off.
Yeah, he was tired. He was tired. And when you look at it, that's why I do think Nanto in here, it's a very different game, and it's a really interesting 100%, tactic, because Somerville could provide a lot of the energy that, they needed. But with Nanto, he could have really made use of kind of that back three that we were really doing and stretched the pitch a little bit more. I think it would have allowed Leeds to be a lot more expansive. And also, again, Tyler Adams, because, again, I don't want to diminish the role that Mark Roca had, who had such a really good game in terms of progressing. But whenever Gabriel Jesus dropped in the midfield, Roca was the one that was picking him up. And so there was a constant kind of man-to-man press in the middle third that basically really hurt our ability to get up the pitch in the first half. But I think those were the big pressing concerns. Did you see it a little bit differently, or do you kind of agree on
the
that?
thing is, the reason I feel like we were struggling in that first 20 to 25 minutes, I feel like I don't know if it was just me, but it felt like that we were just saying you can have your chance at centre forward, and then it switched. I think we started with, if I'm not mistaken, we started with Jesus, and then Martinelli went central, and then Trossard went central for a bit. Like it was kind of like, here, your go, my go, your go, my go. And then when we started to think, hang on a second, we actually have to win this game. We can't just have turns playing centre forward. It felt like we kind of thought, okay, we'll get our shit, we'll get our shit together and really,
Well, to be fair, the left-hand side fluidity was far better than the right. And I mean, it
yes,
came down simply for me to having Trossard touchline or not. Like, as soon as Trossard was given the fluidity to kind of come inside a little bit more, I think the flexibility
basically
opened
when
up.
White was more aggressive. When White was more
Yeah.
aggressive, then it allowed Trossard to come inside and do what Bukayo usually
But you know
does.
what, mate? Like, I sympathize because I know what he's thinking. Rob Holding's there alone. And so
Yeah,
when
of
when
course.
it
And no, no,
when
no,
it
and that's completely fair. And this is the thing. I don't blame Ben for not being more aggressive
yeah.
because of exactly what you just said. But the fact is when he became more aggressive, that allowed Trossard to get better as well. Because when you have Trossard closer to goal, he'll be a better goal threat.
Look,
It's
I,
simple.
I think it's fair because without Bukayo Saka, which was another huge absentee to the
Mhm.
11, right? What you basically got is Jesus had a lot more demand to be touchline, right? Like
Correct.
Trossard
Yes.
himself is a close combo player. We've seen that he is much more of a central player in terms of how associative he is with everybody else in terms of his quick burst. I mean, he was doing a fine job, but that entry pass from Ben White into a right footer of Trossard that we give to our wingers, that pass from deep that makes them run onto the ball as opposed to receiving back to goal.
Basically, minimum with principles. Basically, just have them receive inside it and be able to run on.
Yes,
And
and
just
but
yeah,
those principles were kind of done because the receiving was done on a right-footed player that was
exactly.
miscalculating. And of course, Martin Odegaard was trying to help out, but those kind of decisions in that right half space were clunky. They weren't working. And it wasn't until basically Trossard drifted in field and then we had Jesus kind of drop a little bit more wide that those
I mean,
dynamics
to be
helped a
fair to
bit.
Martin, there was a fair, I wouldn't say it was a lot, but there was a couple where he was trying to hit that overlap and trying to get Trossard inside, and he was
He
trying,
tried, but it's
but
not
it's
dynamic,
just not the
right?
same. It's not the same,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this is the thing for me. And like I know we've often considered a bit of um a bit harsh on him, but the thing is, when you have that ability to not only, if we had an overlap on the from right central midfield, we're not asking Ben to run up the pitch, and we don't have the concerns with holding in transition.
Well, I
Like
think
it just look,
it
you can attack it from the front. I mean, I just feel
what
like
the
if you're
demand is though for me, mate, like,
mm,
okay, you have to ask certain questions, right? So if your right back is overlapping, then the
mm,
pressure on the center midfielder to overlap is not there. So
no,
in a normal team, when you've got Bukayo Saka and you want to do this and you've got Ben White willing in that overlap, right?
yes,
Fundamentally, it means that you remove that responsibility from the midfielder. So Odegaard's
right. But the
fine.
thing is, the midfielder then has to be able to pick up in transition. Then the
Right.
midfielder has to
Which
be able
is
to
which is kind of what
basically
we've been doing all season.
screen the
Yeah,
defense.
which is fine. That's what Odegaard's done all season, and he's done it really quite well.
Yeah,
But then when you've got a Rob Holding at the back, what that trouble is we've got more of a 3-2. We don't have Ben in the middle for third that is constantly providing that overlap. That is
right.
diminished. And so then you basically have to put a lot of pressure on the central midfielder to do that dynamic overlap. And we know that
Which is why
Martin,
this is why we'll get into later that we'll get into lineups
yeah,
of personal lineups later. But this concept is the main reason why I want Emil playing is because of that overlap and the
look,
way it's set up.
and the frustration is it doesn't even have to be a meal. And I'm doing this on purpose because a lot of people seem to think that I have this bias. But fundamentally, what you need is you need two players that are going to overlap. And if Ben can't, because we've got the fear of Rob Holding at
Vieira
the back,
can.
which is very like fine. I don't mind that logic. What
Mhm.
I don't understand is that the right wing, if we don't have a Saka, it has to be a touchline winger, mate. Like if you're not going to use Emil Smith Rowe and the central midfielder to do that, then you can't use a close combo player in a Trossard to do that role because he is not receiving off the right foot and the dominant side
It's
very
one
well.
of it's one of
He's
Vieira
also
or
he's
ESR
also
for
going to
me.
want to come into the spaces that Odegaard already
Mm.
operates in. And so if you don't have somebody like Odegaard that can provide that overlap, then you're demanding your touchline winger to stay wide and we lack the width. That's what the problem was in the first half. And you know what changed? Ironically, Trossard just dropped in a lot more in the field. and
Yeah.
Jesus drifted wide. And so you could have achieved this by just, again, starting Jesus right wing's an option. You could even have switched the wingers, having Martinelli operate as the touchline winger on the right wing and have Trossard on the inside. Like, there was ways to do this, but having Trossard play a touchline role is not something that I think Mikel should be asking of him. It's not his fault, and he's done an excellent job to date of trying to do and
It's not
accommodate
his
those
proclivity.
things.
Like his skill
Right.
set isn't aligned to being a touchline winger. Like
Yeah.
as you mentioned, for me, that there's three different solutions to this. As we've talked about already, Emile or Vieira can make that overlap. Even with Vieira with his final ball, he'll be able to produce the cutbacks and the crosses from the byline. Not a problem. The second option is, as you mentioned, having one of our other forwards are there, because having Martinelli or having Jesus there allows you to create that that not only transition ability, but not only the way we set up in wide areas. They can hold the width and be able to come inside from wide instead of starting wide. And this is the main differential here: is the difference between starting wide and ending up wide. If you're ending up in that zone, look at Bakayo's goal versus United. No one can blame. No one's saying that they can't come inside, but we need to have where you're receiving, because when you receive, that stretches the block, because you have players running out and trying to meet you one-on-one. So if you can't have that, you need that ability to stretch the pitch. And that's what, as we've talked about on the channel before, the six-man attack does as well. It stretches the pitch because your fullbacks or your wide players are very wide because of the amount of players you have in one line. So the issue for me is, and this is something we'll talk about in a second, is if we're having an issue in transition, or not forget transition, if we're having an issue with one side of our defense, one defender isn't as strong as the rest, and we're looking at a title race here, you need to have that ability to be able to cover that defender, which is why Ben is so crucial, because Ben can be someone to basically create those second ball turnovers, create basically run back and help Rob out. And if Rob overcommits,
He's not going to make Rob defend space. Fundamentally, like, it's really simple. A big reason why Rob has struggled is whenever
because he
he's
has
had
to
to
cover
defend.
space. And the
Yeah.
other problem is his over aggressiveness.
Yep, and that stops when you're the central center back in a 3, right? So it's no problem having Ben deep. In fact, it's preferred. It's what we need to do while William
Yeah, no,
is
100%.
out. And then you got to talk about, and I want to bring up this comment about James. It's like, sure, yeah, Nelson at the right wing is a more natural fit as a touchline winger. In this sense, I mean, look, we struggled because Trossard is in such good form that you're not going to make that decision. But again, for me, if you were dead set on this front 3 playing, I think the roles needed to be switched for maximum kind of flexibility, right?
You needed to have them more central. That's the main thing for me.
It's okay for me. I'll disagree, because I think you can totally have a touchline winger. I think that's not the problem, because really,
I hear it, but I would say with the skill set of the front 3 that we have, I would have preferred the central midfielders to provide the overlap and the width.
Look,
Or
I
if you want
like
even
it.
the fullback, so have Tierney provide an overlap and have White provide an overlap. I think the skill set of those 3 players, you want them close to goal. Maybe Jesus not. So maybe Jesus can go on one side and provide that wide option and that wide overload. But the other 2 in Martinelli and Trossard, you want them in the box. That's where you want them. So I don't mind it being central. I don't mind it being narrow. I just want the somewhat either a midfielder or a fullback to provide that overlap, so you're stretching the block and being able to create the crosses that we can get the tap-ins and the
you don't
high
want
chances
you
from.
don't want to run into the issue when somebody has a really deep block, a 6-3-1, a 4-5-1. When you pack the center of the pitch, you don't want to make the pitch small. That makes it a
You
lot
want to make
easier
it
to
big, of
defend with.
course.
That's fundamentally the biggest thing. And so when you do have a look at it, again, when you have that front line, look, Trossard and Gabriel Jesus, there are these players that are very socio-effective, whatever fancy terminology you want. They're basically
like each other.
They're combo players. They're tight space, combo players, 1-2 touch, like to play with others and like to bring others into play. That's what they are. So don't have one of them as a touchline option. And so for me, if you're going to have kind of this front line happen, it probably would have been a little bit more fruitful if we had Gabri Jesus drift wide. And you know what? He did it on his own. I think that transitions us really well.
When the lineup came out, what did you think was the front 3?
I thought it would be this just because of seniority, but I didn't like it, and I didn't like that.
I thought that it was going to be Marcelo Santa, Jesus right wing. That was my initial thought, and have Trossard
I
with Xhaka.
know he doesn't want to do that to Gabby
I know he
Jesus
doesn't want to do it,
coming
but
from a
I'm just
seniority
saying
thing. I would
because
have loved it. I think we did this as a solution in game. It's
Mhm.
it's a solution that made us click. But again, the struggles at the start were because we didn't do this. And we had Trossard as the one that was on the right wing and Jesus out. It wasn't until Trossard came inside that things opened up. And I just wanted to provide the why for that instead of just explaining what it is. Because again, you've got to understand why that initial hiccup happened. And it just comes from the fact that we don't have enough of an overlap with Ben staying deep, that then Martin isn't going to provide that. And that's fine. He doesn't have to. He needs somebody to stay wide. And Trossard is not going to be the person. You're wasting that talent. You're wasting that ability to kind of combine in the middle, that goal threat. And, when he did come inside, by the way, he was arguably man of the match. I think Granit Xhaka, we're going to talk about him later because he deserves it. He is the man of the match for me. But, Trossard
Mhm.
was so good when he came inside in terms of bringing other people into play, scanning. And we'll talk about my big Santi Cazorla shout in terms of earlier in the week when I made that post about Trossard. But I think this is a good transition
I think
into
we should
talking
talk
about the
about Xhaka,
goals
to be honest.
because we haven't got into that, and I definitely want to have time to give Xhaka his segment. So I'm
Yeah.
going to veto the hosting duties and say we have to talk about the goals really quickly.
Yeah.
Look, the first goal comes from Gabby Jesus doing Gabby Jesus things in a chaos sense. I don't think this is a system goal. This
One
is
of these
him picking
dribbles is
up.
going to score a goal at some point. It's got to. Like it's getting
Yes,
ridiculous now. Like the amount of times this guy has gone on all these crazy runs, and then, I mean, this technically has because he got tackled, and well, not tackled is a bit
mm.
generous. Let's put it. He got kicked in the knee, and he went down. And yeah, solid penalty. But these dribbles are crazy. There's a comp going around of him just from when he's come back from his injury, and the skills that he does, what he brings to the team, it's ridiculous. So
He's a
like
system breaker, right? Like we talked. That's what
he's a
that's
block breaker. Like he's someone that will cause, and this is something Pep has been very keen on. Dribblers that cause chaos is what you need to break blocks. I think there's a pretty good Pep quote. I'll post it on Twitter later, but there's a good quote from Pep about it. And if you can, passing basically maintains structure, but dribbling breaks blocks. I think that's something along those lines. But there's
the ball traveling is easier to stop than a player
yes,
who doesn't have predicated patterns going about it. Look at Iniesta. The quote that
yes,
you're talking about was talking about Iniesta and what made him so special. It wasn't just the fact look, he's a brilliant footballer. He had a brilliant kind of passing range and whatnot, but fundamentally his dribbling ability to get out of tight spaces meant that teams themselves couldn't just stay in a block. They had to attract players to him because he forced the issue. He drew people out of position to him. And look, that is the major part of a block that you need to do, right? You need these dribblers to draw markers out of their spot, out of their zones, to leave space for your attackers to kind of fill in. And look, I'm with you. I think the penalty, sure, it's soft, but they're given.
I don't even think it's soft. Like he kicks his knee. Like it's not.
It's an attacker being cute. It's not soft. It is a penalty, but I do know it's definitely an
I don't
attacker
like this
being
notion
cute.
that it's clock because you know as well as I do, the stability in your leg comes from that knee joint, and if it's kicked
It
on a
does.
stride, like
Look,
it could
if I'm being
disable.
deadly honest, the way he does it, because he does it already kicked down, it shouldn't cause him to go over. But I'm yelling at Gabby Jesus not to be honest in that space. I'm telling him to
It's
go
not even
down
that he's
because
not,
he
to be
needs to.
honest. I would have said if there's no
If
reason
he
for him
stays
not
on
to
his
go
feet, does
down.
the referee give that penalty?
No,
No. So
and that's the thing. So
He
that's
has
what
to.
I'm saying. There's no reason for him not to go down. But I'm not saying the difference is I think the difference what we're saying is this isn't Kane versus Decore where it's just ridiculous and there's no reason for him to go down whatsoever. The guy's got kicked in the leg with someone's studs. Like
Mm.
I could completely understand why he's going over. The question is if he doesn't go over, it doesn't get given. So he has to go over.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I think it kind of almost emulated our struggles in the first half, because I think if I remember correctly, it was something like in the 39th minute that we get this breakthrough. And it does come from a bit of individual play, but also it comes from Gabby Jesus drifting from the center of the pitch out wide again, dropping in that half space. And look, we get a little bit of a Zinchenko overlap, which is rare. He doesn't use it. But he uses that run to create the space for himself, because if you see that run is what's crucial to allowing a marker to kind of get away from Gabby Jesus and for him to go one-on-one with A-Lane. That is the benefit of those type of runs. So when we talk about an overlap and we talk about how much we love players that do that, it's because when you provide options like that, it takes away defenders and markers from your wingers that are looking to go 1v1. That's all it does. So I think that was a really good, maybe underrated piece of play by Zinchenko, who I thought was actually quite good in this game. He really struggled before, but he was a lot better versus Leeds.
I think the international break helped him a lot. I think it was a good time for the international break for him.
It was a
Like
very good game by him.
Like me and you have discussed this in the break and for about a month now. I think that he's obviously been amazing for us. Not amazing, but he's been good for us. But he seems to have kind of got lost a bit in his own head, and just emotionally, he was getting a bit like overly invested at times in the title charge. And I think that he's gone away with this national team. He's calmed down a bit, and he's really, like the funny thing is Ben was the one cheering on the crowd this game, which you'd never really associate with Ben. And Zinchenko looked quite calm all game. So I don't know what's kind of happened there, but
they must take the one Space Jam attitude of the other. They must switch.
Yes, I mean, I think before we get into the second goal, I just want to talk about just quickly the dynamic between the dynamic between Trossard, Marcelli, and Jesus, in terms of not the things we talked about already, but the things about them combining. Because what we talked about their positioning and how they combine in spaces, but the actual link up play between the three of them. Martinelli, when he was central, I think a lot of people have criticized. Very unfairly, his ability to link up play in that middle to the final third, and his ability to drop and connect play was pretty darn good yesterday. And I think that needed a quick mention, because if you look at Trossard, Marcelli, and Jesus, what they all excel in is that sort of that middle third connection to the final third, and their ability to really be able to take themselves out of the final third, create those overloads.
Let me just peel off that idea, because it brings off into the second half beautifully about what we did as a change. Because Ben White, Ben White, he was much farther up the pitch, and like that rotation again. What we did is we told Martin to drop in that middle third to basically protect Rob Holding instead of having Ben deep, and that change meant that Trossard was able to go on the inside. Again, it's a simple change, but it's something that is what I think was missing in the first half. And I think Mikel recognized this, because you could see it a lot earlier that, Ben was willing to provide that overlap. And again, it's all about balance and it's all about chemistry. And, people think it's about critiquing individual players, but it's not. If you don't provide that kind of dynamic overload or that dynamic run on the outside, then you force your wingers to remain touchline. And if you're forcing a winger who is a touch tight kind of player, a close combo player, to be touchline, you're not going to maximize him. So I think the biggest change was basically allowing Ben to kind of go up. It drew Jack Harrison out, okay? And it meant that Trossard was a lot more 1v1 on the inside against Firpo and Strike, and boom, that kind of that interchange with Jesus was deadly between the two. They had a really good understanding, and I felt that was really the moment that we kind of opened up and destroyed Leeds space or defensive shape, because originally it was Firpo against Trossard out wide, with Jack Harrison defending deep. But that switch meant that, Jack Harrison, who isn't great on the outside, struggled to really contain kind of the movement of Ben. And Trossard was able to kind of go more against Strike and the center backs, which is something that they didn't like. And I think that was something that we didn't do enough on in the first half. And so that was excellent in terms of kind of a little bit of a tactical switch that allowed us to kind of open up a little bit more. And kudos to kind of Martin Odegaard providing that kind of deep cover, because it allowed, Trossard to kind of do his thing a little bit more on the inside more often than not. And that's when Trossard kind of came alive. Those moments when he was left out wide to kind of match up against Firpo was definitely something that he didn't want to do. And so having Ben as the widest outlet out there meant that you got your players a lot more inside. It meant that, Trossard was drifting in field and causing all sorts of problems on the inside in terms of the marking. And so that was kind of the key major change, as I saw it. And it kind of led us into some of the goals then, and when we talk about the second half, Martinelli receives, right? And it comes from a Ben White overlap. And there's a big reason
Yeah.
that we've spent some time talking about it because, again, he receives it deep, but it is Ben White's ability to provide the sixth man back post run that, again, he scored his first goal not too long ago, and he does it again here with a beautiful system goal. But, guys, what is the reason for it? It is attacking the back post with a six-man overlap. And it's, again, not when we're chasing a game. We've done this in many different phases, and it's what offers a lot more space to teams that are going to defend with six. If you defend with six, very often more than not, you're going to have to attack with six to
Hmm.
find the breakthrough. And we do it here. And it's just a beautiful cross by Martinelli, who I think, again, doesn't get the praise that he deserves. It's an inch perfect ball kind of in behind back post. He knows somebody's going to be there. And Ben gambles, he gambles correctly, and boom, 2-0 with a beautiful, beautiful goal. What did you kind of make of that second kind of overlap? Again, a system goal.
I mean, you talk about a system goal, and it completely is. I completely agree with you. But the point is what we've seen from Pep's teams in the past is that ability to attack the back post. You looked at Raheem Sterling in the past. You look at Gabriel Jesus in the past, coming in from wide and attacking that back post. But usually it's the winger that does it. In this case, I mean, we've seen Xhaka have a couple of these as well, but in this case, it's the fullback doing it. And the reason why that's different is because that we're committing more men to attack, as you mentioned. But the one thing that I want to bring up is the dynamic ability to crash the box, because the dynamism from our front five or front six in this case to create those overloads in the box, it also helps in terms of being able to push teams back into their own box to create shots from outside the box as well. So you have dynamics in terms of crashing the box and being able to provide multiple people to hit inside the box, whether it be runners or late arriving into the box and creating separation from your marker. But you also have the ability to push teams back in their blocks. So you can have the Jorginho versus Aston Villa, the Thomas Partey versus Spurs, and the Thomas Partey versus who's the other one? I can't remember now. But there was another Thomas Partey goal where Chelsea in preseason, for example, where these kind of goals created from outside the box. You're creating space for midfielders to hit from outside the box, as well as having attackers that really attack the box. But also adding wide players in terms of your fullbacks is going to give you that extra added man to create even a 5v4 in the box at times. So you're always going to have that extra man, and especially with the dynamism of the runs and the timing of those runs. If you have that system where you know that you're the winger or opposite side fullback or whoever it is going to create that ball for you, it allows for the timing of those runs to be deadly, and you can't pick them up. And the same thing
Well,
happening against Bournemouth for Ben White's goal.
Well, what it is, mate, is like again, I've had a lot of debates on the timeline about this in terms of attacking with six channels, and it's it's been levied at me that it's going to be in game states, but I just don't agree because we're going to face teams quite a bit. They're going to be camping out in their box just by nature of how dominant we are, and the response to having more bodies back means that you need to commit more bodies forward if you're going to find a goal. You don't want to be outnumbered number wise. And so if you're going to add more players to the back line, like Leeds did in this instance about asking their center mids to kind of drop in the back line of a back six, you're going to have to ask your fullbacks, somebody, to attack with six channels and join the attack with you in order to create a numerical superiority somewhere to take advantage of. You're not going to work a team around with less players. And so this was just another example of a really beautiful goal of Ben providing that overlap all season, which has been a huge part of our improvement. Asking that kind of other fullback to provide another option. And if you have a pause in terms of the goal, there's something like 8 Leeds players in the box, in terms of just showing how deep that they were. But
Mhm.
beyond that, we'll move on to kind of discussing the third goal into it because it showed something else, where we
Yes.
were teasing a lot of kind of the Gabby Jesus dropping. So we talked about this a little bit earlier in the pod about how he likes to cause havoc, dropping into the half space and giving himself as a +1. We've seen Trossard do it at times, but look, Gabby Jesus does it brilliantly. And with Trossard on the inside, he makes such good decisions in terms of receiving the ball in tight spaces, but also scanning. This third goal is not so much just Gabby Jesus's run, who is brilliant about finding Trossard on the inside, but Trossard receives, he goes to the right. And if you notice in the replay, he's looking around behind himself to check where Gabby Jesus is. And his cutback is very purposeful into the spot where Gabby Jesus is going to run. That is completely on Trossard's ability to be a 360 receiver, a 360 scanner. He is somebody that, is making sure to have the pass, give time to the players he's giving the ball to. And all of these things kind of go back again when I talk about kind of why do I see him as potentially transitioning as a central midfielder? It's because he's got a lot of these traits in terms of receiving, scanning, caring about the weight of pass, but also giving time to the receiver of that pass. And look, it's a beautiful goal. Gabby Jesus doesn't get lazy. He follows his run, very basic coaching trick. Whenever you pass, follow your ball. He does that brilliantly. And Trossard buys himself time because he takes out a couple Leeds players in terms of his run. And his check back is just putting the ball into an area where he knows Jesus is running onto. Bam, 3-0. What did you make kind of this goal?
I mean, you summed up quite perfectly in terms of the ability of Trossard to shift defenders around. I think that's the main thing, because the way he turned onto his to find that ball to Jesus, the defender didn't know where he was going. Let's be honest. Like, it was very much as I was just coming off on what I was just mentioning before for the second goal, the timing of the runs. If you know where the ball's going to be, you can time your run and basically create a scenario where a defender isn't going to be able to stop you because they don't know where you are. So I think the main thing with this goal, and the main thing we have to think about going forward, and we will talk about title race and all this stuff in the last 10 minutes of this pod, but going forward, I think there's games where we need to be able to put them away in terms of they're not. I don't feel like they're going to be at the City levels, the Liverpool levels of difficulty. Only as Liverpool's because it's at Anfield, but these, when you have the drop off in difficulty, which isn't that high, you need to be able to create chances that will really put them away and demoralize teams. Because as Javi Gracia has said in his presser before and after, you're preparing for Arsenal. You're preparing for a fight. Like, it's very much, he had that mentality of like, we are in for a hard day here. And I think a lot of teams, like you're looking at Southampton, West Ham, going forward, are going to have that mentality, because we're top of the league. We're playing I would say the best, if not the second best football in the league. And we really produce high quality chances where I think since the City game, I think there's only been once or twice that we haven't scored more than 2 goals in this. I think it's just Leicester, if I'm not mistaken, where we haven't scored more than 2 goals in a game. So we're producing a high amount of attacking volume, and this kind of goal shows that you have the ability to have runners come from deep, but also runners come from unpredictable areas, and have the attacking, whoever it is on the cross, know where to put the ball.
Well, absolutely. And not even just that, like, I'll build off that, because what we did in this game was encourage the half space crossing model, which is something that we haven't done all game. But, again, this is where we'll talk about Granit Xhaka, give him his due praises, because the man was phenomenal in this game. He was a key component about opening up kind of the Leeds back line by when he would receive at the top of the box, he'd look about sending a half space cross in. And before even, the third goal, Jesus has a chance to make it 4-0 in terms of the half space cross, drifting in between the center backs. And, the header's loose. And we did that quite a bit, and it actually leads into the fourth goal, because Martin Odegaard does a phenomenal back post ball out to kind of what normally was the provider, but then the scorer in Granit Xhaka, in terms of just peeling off in the back. Martin Odegaard does that half space cross, which, again, it's beautiful. It's a very good trajectory. I wish he did it more. He has the capability, the technique to do it more. Us stretching that Leeds back line was all about finding space beyond the center backs and kind of exploiting that. And we do it to make it kind of 4-1. I'll talk really briefly on the goal. I don't think there's too much there besides it being a really poor transition. We know that Rog kind of gets flustered in terms of his 1v1. He doesn't do a great job in terms of that. But
No,
then
but there is when you
Zinchenko
finish,
is
I
kind
don't
of
think you can talk about.
Zinchenko's just kind of in the middle, and it takes a deflection off. And look, Ramsdale's livid that the shot gets off to begin with Christensen, right? And rightly so. And I think he does actually save it if, Zinchenko's not there. He's just left to kind of have a shot at Ramsdale kind of
It deflects off him, basically.
It deflects off him. But look, it's a transition goal. I want to give you a chance to talk about it, but I don't think it's anything beyond poor concentration. And I think this has been an issue for us in transition quite a bit.
There's also, because the thing is, I want to talk about Granit Xhaka in detail for a good 5-10 minutes because he deserves this game. But what I'm annoyed about, and we talk about it a lot on the channel, not just George, but I talk about it a lot as well. If you change 2 members of a pod, you're going to change the performance of that pod. It's very simple. We talk about pods a lot. Any 3-man pod, a centre midfielder, winger, striker pod, for example, or a left back centre midfielder's left wing pod. Whatever you do, if you change 2 out of 3 personnel in a pod, you're going to change the performance of that pod. And what happened was we bought Thomas off, and we already don't have Saliba. When you have Jorginho and Holding in front of each other, and they both get beat, it's just I was very frustrated. I was with Ramsdale here. I don't know why we decided to go, okay, we're going to take. I guess Thomas' fitness issues. I don't know, but for me, it just felt like having Jorginho get beat and then Holding. I don't know what his plan.
Well, he was isolated, just 1v1.
Exactly.
It basically is what happened.
This is what I was about to get onto. Him being isolated 1-on-1 means that he doesn't have the security, he doesn't have the confidence to either back off or produce a tackle.
Well, he's drawn out wide, right? Fundamentally, Ben White is deep.
He doesn't have the one-on-one capability to really defend that danger. He doesn't step off. He doesn't go in. He does, and if he did go in, he'd make a foul. So in either situation, I don't have the confidence in him. Yeah. So that's what annoyed me about that goal: the fact that we had Holding on Jorginho, one in front of the other. That confused me, and that made it so that we had a channel that they could attack, and they got their goal from it.
Yeah, no, it's really frustrating. I don't have much to go off of there because it's kind of something that you accept with Jorginho and Holding in the 11. Like in terms of their ability to kind of defend wide when that happens,
both in the 11 and not have the confidence to have someone next to them that will protect that pod.
I think that is a conversation for another day, at the expense of talking about kind of the title race, because I do want to give time towards that. I just wanted to end on the Granit Xhaka phenomenal performance, because it wasn't just second balls. People just talk about the second ball thing, but they never recognize.
Our build-up is nothing without Xhaka. That's the main thing.
His ability to offer himself in build-up is phenomenal. His positioning. I think when people talk about, we can replace or easily upgrade Granit Xhaka to this 20 goal or an assist season midfielder, guys, he's on 10 already with a 3-month period where he hasn't had his main striker that offered him that fluidity, and he's already performing. Look, it's not feasible to imagine that he doesn't contribute another 4 or 5 goals and assists. So when you talk about upgrading easily in the position, I think you really downplay this idea that sure, offensively there might be traits that you might do, but again, the half space cross, that is something that we don't do enough of. He was phenomenal at it in this game. And, it kind of opened up Martin to be a little bit more dangerous with it. I definitely think he drew on Granit Xhaka's willingness to do it when he had Bukayo Saka, right? Bukayo Saka's entry meant that he wasn't as responsible higher up the pitch, and so he had more time deeper, and he could afford that that cross to happen. But again, Granit was really, really important in this match. Again, my man of the match. He doesn't get the props that he deserves. And of course, pre-World Cup, he was player of the season. People forget that. And it was completely because of Gabriel Jesus's exit. He's the one that hurt the most from a Jesus injury, because he was unable to provide that freedom in the final third that we know of. And so he did it phenomenally well. And look, in the end, we get a really comfortable 4-1 victory against Leeds. We kind of avoid this trap game in quotations, and we'll just end on a really quick discussion on the title charge, because now we're in single digits in terms of what's left. It's exciting, sure. There's 9 games left for us physically on the blocks, and we're now, in terms of the clock to 14, it is set at the 9 position, and it's You've got 9 games, 9 finals. We all know the importance of it. I'll just ask you really quickly about kind of approaching these games, assuming that William Saliba is out longer, because
I
again,
want him out longer. I want him fit for the Etihad. I think that's the main issue. And sorry to cut you off, but the main thing for me is I've considered. I don't know about you, but I've considered Anfield a loss since the day we got the calendar. Like I've never assumed that we're going to go to Anfield and win. I think that both fan bases are so devoid of confidence in terms of us not feeling like we can go to Anfield with Rob Holding and get a result, and them thinking they're just rubbish right now. I think they've got Salah, they've got Virgil, and this is all the stuff we'll discuss in the preview. But these guys know what they're doing, especially at Anfield. So I'm not. Especially, and we have the one person we haven't mentioned is Thiago. Thiago might be back for that game as well. So it's
likely
a
back.
different squad.
It's a very I've been pressuring people to reconsider their perspectives
I
on
don't think we win
Anfield
there, mate. I just
for
don't.
so
And,
long
and, and
at
I
the
don't think it's
expense
because
of
we're
not
bad.
talking. Look, I don't want to get into it on an isolated game because we've got the preview coming up for you guys to watch.
Yeah,
But look, third in the home league table, only 4 points off City. They've only lost at Anfield once this season. When you talk about
the league. Yeah.
returnees in terms of all of their players coming back, Virgil van Dijk and Thiago added to that squad is a very different squad. And Klopp, he showed you how much fear is the wrong word, how much anger and I think rivalry he has with Mikel Arteta with his choice in lineup against Chelsea. He didn't respect Chelsea. He does respect us. In terms of Salah and Robertson, look, there's issues there. But I think broadly on the title race, even losing at Anfield or dropping points, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and I'm not forecasting it, but when you look at the run in right now, there are definitely, I'd say, 3 games where, for me, they're trap games. There's the Etihad, there's Anfield, and then you can fill in either Brighton or Newcastle at home. For me, I don't think it's as worrying at Newcastle at home as people believe. I think people overblow that, particularly with the
Newcastle
injuries that we
away.
sustained. Yeah, at their home. Sorry. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Newcastle away. I still don't think that's a terribly phenomenal game. I actually think that Brighton is going to be a very difficult game. Just the way that Brighton are playing in terms of their search for European football, they're going to be quite motivated in that. I think that Newcastle are going to wrap it up quite easily, to be honest with you. But beyond that, there are 3 to 4, depending on your debates, of really tough games, and there's 5 really good games. In terms of advice, the only thing that I can say is stop looking over your shoulder and start focusing on what's in front of you. And I think Mikel does this really brilliantly in terms of being present, in terms of compartmentalizing the future worry versus kind of your present worry. And you just focus on making sure that we do our fundamentals, because if we do, we will be consistent. We have been all season. It's actually City that haven't been. If anything, the
That's the
pressure
point I
is
was trying
on.
to make, though.
Sorry, just let me get this out. Is like
No,
City,
but yeah.
if anything, are the ones that must change their principles to be consistent. City, I think, have only gone 5 games winning in a row once this season, whereas Arsenal have done it 3 times. And it's more than 5 games, but we've done it 3 times. So if you talk about it from an Arsenal perspective, it is not about looking over your shoulder, making sure the pressure doesn't get to you and all this nonsense that people talk about. It is about focusing on your own game, respecting your principles of play, and making sure you earn the right to win every match. You do that, Arsenal will win. Arsenal will have a title. That it's as simple as that. Saliba or not. We've shown an ability to kind of adapt to main players being out. Is it a hurt, or does it make the job more difficult? 100%, no problem with that. But if you focus too much on what other people are doing, you're going to lose sight of what made you great this season. And I think, to be fair, this is a criticism more towards our fans and the PTSD of injuries than it is about the players and the boys, because they have shown this ability to meet the mark and meet the questions. And I think that they deserve their respect. They deserve their support. And I think it's fine to have anxiety, but to kind of go overboard on it and kind of draw in a lot of these injury PTSD concerns, for me, is a struggle. So support the boys. They've earned it. Recognize the anxiety. I get it. It's there. But we got to pull together because the boys deserve it. They've done it all season.
Deserve it. And for me, I think the reason why I was talking about Anfield is because there's... Okay, so City, as you mentioned, have not been perfect all season. If they are perfect, as a lot of people predict they will be, and they go, what? They've got 10 games left because we've got 9. Yeah. They go 30 for 30, and we lose the title. Then that's so be it. I mean, that's if we
the
have
best team won at that
the
point.
best team won. But the thing is, I just don't want to to leave any points on the table. That's from what the main
But
thing
you know
for
what
me.
they would
And I
have to do,
think
mate?
that's at Anfield.
They would have to put together a run they haven't managed all season.
Exactly, all
And
season.
so that is the key. And look, have they done it before? Yes. And trust me, if you're somebody that's with me in group chats, I've probably been the one that has pushed the experience of Manchester City more than any Arsenal fan. But I
Trust
can't
me, he
sit there
has.
and I can't sit there and logically say though that City have it easier because fundamentally they've got to change their entire
No, they don't.
season's performance to do something that they only managed to do last season and season before.
Yes.
Arsenal, on the other hand, have to change things to the point of not doing what they've been doing all season in order to lose the title. And that's a very different distinguishing matter, no matter if the point gap is 3, 5, or 8. I don't care what the point gap is. It's about those principles because if you do those things, you're going to be successful. And I think looking at it as a points total, and then I'm going to give you the microphone because I've talked a lot, is the wrong way to look at it. I
Yes.
really hate this idea of a magic number of points that you must need and people constantly asking and putting limits on what the players can or cannot do. Fundamentally, it's about making sure that we do the things that we've done right. It's about making sure that some of these issues that we talked about, even in this game, are maximized. Enjoy your half space crossing. Make sure the pods are symmetrical. Make sure that you're offering yourself as a +1 when you struggle to get out of build up. Make sure that your fluidity in the front line is still maintained. Don't lose the things that make you great. And don't get stressed just because the environment says that pressure should be on you. Just recognize that you have deserved and earned the right to be there and play that way each and every game. You do that, you'll be successful. And that's what we've done pretty much every game this season. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't think the players are feeling that way. In every interview that you talk about with Martin Odegaard, Aaron Ramsdale, they preach this presence of mind, compartmentalization. It's only when I talk to fans that I see that kind of anxiety creep in. But again, support the boys. We'll be back talking about kind of the Anfield preview and all those intricacies. So if you have questions on those, save it for them. Curtin, I want to give you the last word before we sign off about the title. And then don't talk about Anfield because we're going to do a preview.
No, I'm not. No,
But your wrap up to
I'm going to
the
say,
title.
the reason I was talking about Anfield because I feel it's one of the 2 games or 3 games where I feel like I'm nervous for. I think Anfield, Etihad, St James's. I think those are the 3 where I'm thinking like, okay, these are the things. But the thing is, if you talk, as you mentioned, if you talk to any of the players, anyone involved, no one's thinking about the Etihad. No one's thinking about St James's Park. Everyone's focused on Anfield. Everyone who wants to go to that next game. And the thing is, what we haven't what you didn't talk about, when I thought that is very crucial, is FA Cup semi-final, UEFA Champions League knockout stages, Bayern Munich twice, maybe even Real Madrid twice. Like these are a lot of games, and when it gets to the point where you're doing a Wednesday, Sunday, and you're looking at teams that have, like, I don't expect Southampton to win against them, but they could. They've beaten them once already this season. Like you're looking at these games and you're thinking, I'm not going into these games. Like maybe it's because it's against us, but I'm not looking at these games like I was last season when it was City. I'm not looking at these games thinking, okay, yeah, 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, 3 points. They're gonna go again. I'm looking at these games and thinking, Remy Olavi could have a game. Liverpool Pras can have a game. These are different. These are definitely games where, like, if we were talking about trap games, I feel like every game for City, they've got that Champions League in the back of their mind. They've got that. The title race. There's 8 points behind the back of their mind, and I don't feel like. Obviously, they have the same mentality as us. They've been here before. They know what they're doing, one game at a time. But when you're Pep Guardiola, you're thinking, hang on a second. At what point do I focus on the Champions League here? What point? 11 points? 13 points? What point do I go? If we can go to Anfield, I'm sorry I mentioned Anfield again, but if we can go to Anfield and win, and something happens at Southampton, does he go 11 points, a game in hand? Do I really want to go, bar for bar with these guys, or do I want to focus on Bayern Munich? I just think, and this is the other thing, the margin of error for them, they have to be basically perfect. And we've seen it with Liverpool in the past, when you have so many competitions to go for, you overstretch yourself. And at some point, something's got to give. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Sheffield United in the semi-final of the FA Cup. They should be fine with that. Bayern Munich twice, It's going to be a tough game,
I
especially.
think even beyond total games, mate, fundamentally, like we talk about margin for error, sure, but they have to change something that they haven't been able to do all season, whereas Arsenal have to lose something that they haven't lost all season. Those are very different
Mm.
demands when you talk about players, okay? And when
I,
you
the
there's ways
last
for
thing I'm going to say is I believe that we can rebound from a setback like we couldn't last year. I really do feel that if
well, we're the
something
team
goes
that's
wrong,
rescued the most points from losing positions in the league.
exactly. I feel like if something goes wrong, last year that Palace, Brighton, Southampton run, right? When we lost our way, basically. I feel like if we have, I don't feel like we have that in this team this year. I feel like if we go down at Anfield, we go down swinging at Anfield. I feel like the boys can recover and come back again. I don't feel like there's that same sort of overthinking, that inexperience, that where people got too emotional and tried to overdo things, and Mikel tried to overdo things with that 3-1-6 with the against Brighton, for example, and having Xhaka left back, Sambi centre mid. There's not that same sort of big brainness that there was last season. There is a set principle. There's a set ability for this squad. People know what they're doing. Who's going to come in, who's going to drop down, and there's an attacking threat there that we didn't have last year. We had Lacazette and I think Eddie at some points, but this year we have so much more in attack. We have so much more in midfield in terms of being able to have that structure, have that ability to overload in specific zones, and be able to create specific situations in build up and in attack. So as well as a defense that is improving week on week, and even with holding can withstand things as long as it's not overly pressed. But we'll get into that on Anfield. But
Yes.
I have much more confidence in this team than I did a year ago. And
Yeah, and
this
look,
is
we'll be talking about kind of a title race each moment as it comes because we wouldn't
mm,
be doing our job as podcasters if we didn't. But I think fundamentally, let's make sure that we as fans do our part because I think you can recognize the anxiety, but giving into these hypothetical what ifs on both sides do no good. And
stop
it's about
counting
living
points,
in the
guys.
moment.
There's no point.
Yeah, there's
Things
no
are going to
point.
change.
Yeah, and we will have like a little bit of a title section at the end of kind of every pod because you have to at this point. But I mean, it's going to shift away from looking at the overarching picture and seeing how these principles of play are going to translate into the next game because that is what's going to be most
Yeah.
important. Not looking at blocks, not looking at that stuff. So the biggest thing for me is focusing on the present. But look, guys, thank you so much. We stuck for about an hour in. There's 16 of you guys watching, and we love every single one of you. Thank you so much. Before we go, if you guys could drop a like on the video, it really helps out the channel. And of course, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications to know when, in fact, we do upload. We'll be back with Chris kind of soon in terms of catching him on the socials. You can find him at CKFTBL. Of course, me at GeorgeV_AFC and current at current BoP. We are Ball Over Passion here on YouTube or at BoP Footy on the Twitter. So, guys, thank you so much. We'll be back with kind of a preview, I think, roughly probably Friday, and we'll let you guys know about that for Anfield, which is the big one. But, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate all your help and your support, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Go watch
Peace.
the Rice Masterclass.